Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our second in our violent crime series in the Yakima Police Department. Today, we are blessed and excited to have Professor David Kennedy, who's told me to call him David. So I will do that, but I want everybody to know that he's a professor. You teach at John Jay, is that correct?
That's correct.
And I'm going to give you a little bit of background, and then we'll just start asking Professor Kennedy questions. And we encourage anybody who's watching to send in your questions as well, and we will ask those to Professor Kennedy. So first, Professor, we have a community of about 100,000 people. We have a high 93% of America is safer than us by FBI statistics. So we have high rates of violent crime. We have, and the two things I'll really tell you we're kind of focused on is what you would call group violence. A lot of people call gang violence. It is norteños and sureños, so it is very much Hispanic gangs. I don't know that there are any gangs outside of those. I haven't seen them in the time I've been here, but a lot of violence, a lot of shooting, very young offenders, which I think is a little shocking. Also, female gangs who will shoot each other. So that's also not what I'm used to. I came from Denver. Anyway, that's a huge issue. People hear about it all the time. I think a lot of our community is numb to this because they hear it so much and read it so much that it's difficult to relate to. So the first series that we did, the first was a father of a young lady who was killed in a domestic violence incident because we wanted to put a face on what this is and what people are dealing with. This is something I know you have dealt a lot with. And then we really wanted to have you. And so I kind of want to give you a background. You and I just briefly talked, but you don't know this. We had adopted through the U.S. Attorney's Office basically the model that you and your team created about 2 years ago. And I will be honest and say I don't think we did it really well. After I read your book, I realized there's a lot we missed, and we're kind of resetting and trying to do that better. But it's the basic philosophy is what we did. And we were in a meeting, and the U.S. Attorney's Office and their analytics were there with us, and we were kind of going over all the things that you would probably list out as what you should do. And we realized we weren't doing a lot of them. And it occurred to me that very few people in the room even knew what this philosophy is and how it works. So I read 4 books, and I'm a voracious reader, and I picked this one because I think your book, basically it's the basics of it, right? And it's the philosophy, and it really spells out how to do this. Just for your edification, the other ones were Summer in Chicago, I think it is, Bleeding Out, and you may have heard about it, Ghetto Side by Jill Lavoie, very powerful book. You know, the same principles are really in all those books, but your book kind of stood out to me as if people really want to understand what we're doing, they have to read your book. And so the community plays a huge role in what you're talking about. And so we started, I don't remember exactly, but I think it was right before school let out. We kind of did a community-wide book club, bought a bunch of books, the library bought a bunch of books, and people have been reading it. And then we unfortunately had a death in our police department, and so we had to pause a little bit, but now we're back on and we're all talking about it. And so I've been to several book clubs that read the book, and we promised a community version of that, and that's what this is. So I can't believe you said yes. In fact, you reached out to me. I never even knew you knew about this, and you said, hey, I want to help. And I want our community to know that, and I really appreciate it. So with that brief introduction, let me just ask you this. Tell us in Yakima about David Kennedy. Why are you involved in this line of work, and why did you write this book?
Well, Chief, thanks for having me, and to those who have joined you, thanks also for caring about this. I didn't care about this as I should have for a long time. I wanted to be a serious writer. My father was an auto engineer, worked for Chrysler. I grew up outside Detroit. Both my parents were smart, attentive people. They cared about the world. They raised their kids, myself and my 2 sisters, to care about the world. We lived literally a few miles outside the city limits of Detroit. I grew up there in the 60s and 70s, at a time when Detroit was known nationally as Murder City. This was the time of the first heroin epidemic. Detroit was one of the most dangerous cities in the country, one of the most dangerous places in the world. Detroit was a mixed race city, but the violence was being felt almost entirely in the Black neighborhoods and by Black folks. And I didn't really care. Not as I should have. And I think back to the things that I was paying attention to back then, and I cared a whole lot more about South Africa than I cared about Detroit. And I'm ashamed of that. I should have known better, but I didn't. And in the mid 1980s, when I was out of school and teaching myself to be, I hoped, a serious journalist, I had a job at Harvard University doing field research for the faculty at the Kennedy School of Government. And there was a policing project at the Kennedy School. They tapped me to do work for that project. They sent me out into 1980s America just at the beginning of the American crack epidemic. And I found myself in communities of color all over the country where the conditions that those neighborhoods, those people, those families, those communities were being subjected to were beyond anything I could have imagined. The violence, the fear, the gunplay, buildings with bullet holes in them, street shrines to the dead on the corners, loss of not only public space, but people's front yards to drug dealing and the sex trade. It was absolutely appalling. And I had an absolutely visceral reaction to this. This was not sophisticated in any way. It was, this is not okay, and something has to be done about this. And I've been at it ever since. I think most of us, if we were walking by the municipal swimming pool and saw a kid drowning in the swimming pool, we would try to do something about that. And for me, this was no fancier than that. And my life, as in the language we would now use, a privileged white person, had allowed me not to see any of that, but seeing it was transformative.
So I hope you're nimble, because I jump around sometimes. And what you just said reminded me of something in the book. I've read your book a couple times. I really wanted to read it again before we did this, and so I did. You talk in the book, one of the things you say is to law enforcement, you began to have a very uncomfortable conversation that was critical. Do you mind talking about that? Because it's really related to what you're saying.
Not a bit.
Go ahead.
No, go right ahead. So
you were talking about the perception of racism, what race plays in all of this, and how, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, you wrote the book, but basically that was not something most of law enforcement want to talk about, and that you felt it was a critical conversation to have. Can you tell people about that?
Yeah, so I didn't get it either. I will say I'm not that bright. And I didn't see what was there to be seen for much longer than I should have. But I'll tell the story this way. The first field work I ever did in American policing was in Los Angeles with the Los Angeles Police Department in 1985. And this was the beginning of the crack epidemic. Crack hadn't even hit the East Coast when I started. And it was a disaster, especially in California and especially in LA, where it really began, we think. And I sat down with a Black community organizer in South Central LA. This is a former Black Panther. He was no longer militant in that way, completely committed to his community, doing really profound community organizing and community development work. And I sat in his storefront. This is a man probably in his 50s or 60s at that point. And he said, we were making real headway. We were getting somewhere. We had businesses in the community. We built a couple of low-income housing developments. We had single mothers and their family in those developments. They were not renting. They were not Section 8. They owned their homes. They were paying their mortgages. They were beginning the process of developing wealth that helps people, climb out of poverty. He said the government couldn't stand it. And they flooded our community with crack. They taught the kids how to turn the cocaine into crack. The community has collapsed, and now all those mothers who were doing so well a little while ago are out on the corner chasing the pipe. And I sat in my chair across from him in his office and thought, this is crazy talk. This man actually believes that the government of the United States was so offended by his progress and that of his community that they organized a drug epidemic to destroy it. And then 10 years later, I looked around and thought, he was wrong. As a factual matter, it's not true that the government of the United States did that. It was I who didn't understand the history of him and his community and Black America, which is an unbroken history of white folks and the government, including the institutions of criminal justice and the police, systematically using the law to subjugate and harm that community as communities of indigenous Americas and immigrants and LGBTQ and any number of harmed peoples, in which the government absolutely used the law and extra legal measures to do them damage and to keep them subjugated. And his belief that the government would do that was completely realistic historically, even if I think that in detail it wasn't, in fact, factually correct. And the lesson I learned early on was that when white folks talk about these issues, white folks talk about the issue. What's going on with the crack epidemic? What's happened with this police shooting? Is this profiling or isn't it? White folks talk about the incident. Black folks talk about history. And the history here is real and it's awful.
So one of the things that, and these are my words, not yours, but I think this comes out in the book, is if you're in one of these marginalized communities and there doesn't feel like any sense of hope, and it doesn't feel like anybody cares, and everybody you know has negative interactions with, whether it's the police or the courts or whatever, the system, why would you want to get involved and have a relationship? I mean, is that the essence of kind of that?
I think it's worse than that. So you mentioned Gigliovi's book Ghetto Side as one of the books that you've read. I can commend that to everybody listening who even thinks they might be interested in these issues. It's just brilliant. And Jill's book is also set in LA primarily. And it's her experience in that same part of LA, in South Central LA, in living with, as she did for years, with LAPD homicide detectives and the members of the community that they worked with. And one particular story that Jill tells is of a dedicated, saintly LAPD homicide detective trying to get the mother of a murdered young man to share what she might know about her son's homicide. And while he stood there begging her for information, she looked at him and said, "You don't care about my boy." that's history talking, right? That is the collective experience of people in the community that no one person or moment can stand up to. And it's worse than just not cooperating. So I am a violence prevention obsessive. You are doing what you're doing in Yakima because you think that this work that I've been part of has something to offer about violence. When it comes to homicide and gun violence, particularly of the kind we're talking about, but you mentioned that one of your first guests was the survivor of somebody who'd been killed in domestic violence. You know, most women who are brutalized by domestic violence will say, I don't want to call the police. I don't think they can help. I think they may make things worse. I'm going to do everything they say, and it's not going to make things better. They've got stories from their friends and family to that effect. In what people call community violence now, you know, as I do, that a lot of the community violence is not random. It's almost predictable. It's retaliation. It's vendetta. It's a small number of very active people who both get victimized and commit violence. If you are one of those people and you know that somebody's coming to hurt you or your family or your friend, you have a very, very clear choice. You can call Chief Murray and ask for help, or you can get a gun in your friends and you can go take care of things yourself. And if people don't trust or expect help from the government, you are the government, right? You represent the state and its powers in Yakima, Washington. If they don't think the government will help, they will take care of themselves. And that incident becomes another incident that provokes retaliation and gets more people involved. So it's not just not cooperating. If people in distress can't get what they need, they will find a way to make themselves and their loved ones safe. And Ghetto Side, Jill's book, is in many ways an extended argument that if we don't have good and legitimate policing, that creates violence. And she's right.
Yeah, I really view the two of your books as they're compatible. They really speak to the same thing. Okay, so I'm going to ask you this now, and then we'll see if we have any questions. So most of the people that are watching today read your book and maybe even the questions at the back of the book and have an idea of this. But for those who haven't, can you give us kind of a nutshell of what is this philosophy? What is it you're talking about? What is this book telling people works?
So I would say to many of those watching, you are probably family people. And if we did criminal justice and we did violence prevention in families the way we do them out in the world, we would say if your kids misbehave, you throw them out of the house and you never talk to them again. There will be one parent for love and support, another parent for discipline. You have to find a third parent for spiritual guidance because the other two aren't allowed to do that. And by law, your three parents can't speak to each other. That's the way we do criminal justice. It's awful. And the work that Don't Shoot talks about and that continues to develop is really remarkably common sense. We have to make it fancy in order to describe it and test it and all of that, but it's based on some very simple fundamentals. The first of which is when we first looked at homicide at the peak of the crack epidemic, as bad as that was, it turns out that homicide and gun violence is in any place driven by very small numbers of very extreme people. We think of them as offenders they are also, and maybe they're predominantly, victims. You know, and anybody who is at high risk, most anybody who's at high risk for shooting somebody in the community has been shot, has been shot at, has been hurt. If they're still walking around, they're not dead, but a lot of them aren't walking around because they are dead. This very small group of folks mostly hurt one another. They're in groups, not mostly as individuals. And most of those groups are not what we think of as gangs. Norteño Sereno, that's a little bit different than what most people see across the country. That's actually better what you're dealing with, because there's some discipline and leadership in Norteño and Sereno circles, and that means that managing this problem is actually easier than in more disorganized settings. But very small numbers of very high-risk people, mostly in groups. And that simply means that in what turns out to be, theoretically and operationally complicated, but in common sense, very simple terms, if you start talking directly with those groups and you say to them, we don't want you hurt, we don't want you locked up, you are at extremely high risk for both of those things. You're very likely to get hurt, to get locked up. You're unfortunately disproportionately likely to hurt other people. This is a group thing. It's not you as individuals. The beef your group has with another beef is not about you. It's about the group. It's the group expectation that violence will be met with violence. The enemy of my friend is my enemy, all that kind of thing. Your community can't stand this, and people that you respect in your community, surviving mothers, OGs, are going to say to you, this has to stop, and you're going to listen to them because you respect them. We will turn ourselves inside out to keep you safe and in the community. We don't want you hurt. We don't want you locked up. And we're telling you ahead of time, under certain circumstances, when somebody in your group shoots somebody, we're going to pay attention to all the illegal things your group may be doing. And we may not be able to prosecute that homicide, but we certainly can mess up your drug traffic, right? We certainly can look at your probation and parole conditions. We can look at your outstanding warrants. And we're telling you ahead of time, when the group is violent, we're going to figure out how to make an impact, and you are not going to like that. And we don't want to do it, so we're telling you ahead of time. That's what was ceasefire in Boston that cut homicide in half in the city in 2 years and youth homicide by 2/3. It's what has worked all over the country. We're in Sweden and Brazil now. It's working there. Small numbers of very active people at high risk, not being talked to, supported, or held accountable in effective ways. And this is simply a way to make that happen.
So I'm going to ask one more follow-up, and then I'm going to see if we have questions, but I have a lot more just in case we don't. You said in the book two things that really are related to that answer you just gave. You said this all the time. It travels, it travels, it travels. You also said, and they showed up, they showed up, they showed up. And so one thing that we heard early on in this process was people saying, well, he's just talking about black gangs on the East Coast. That isn't going to work in Yakima. I think that's what It Travels speaks to. And then I haven't heard anybody say this, but I think a lot of people must challenge you and say, well, you can ask these gang members to come, but they won't do it. Can you quickly talk about those two things?
Sure. So actually, I understand the first point, but it's interesting. The book is actually not entirely about black gangs. One of the first stories in the book is about Stockton, California. And the action in Stockton is primarily Hispanic. It is itself Norteño and Sereno, just as you're dealing with. And there's a general fact, which is the more organized crime is, the less violent it usually is. The violence really comes overwhelmingly from the chaos of disorganized and undisciplined and rudderless and chaotic groups, because there's nobody to say this is dumb and we're not going to do it. Those groups mostly aren't very good at making money, and so people don't have profits they want to protect. The more structured a gang is, the easier it is to deal with, and the more likely it is to focus on making money and not on acting out. One of the reasons violence on the West Coast has fallen so precipitously over the last 15 years among Latin circles is, and you know this, La M, the Mexican mafia, has really moved from a community and a prison gang into being something pretty close to organized crime. And La M has imposed discipline in street circles because they are very serious about making money, and violence is bad for business. And so I understand the first point, but it absolutely will work for you, and it will be easier than in many other settings. The they'll show up bit was about one particular point, which was, there are ways of formalizing conversations with group members and gang members, one of which is to direct them to a meeting, what we now call a call-in. And part of it is they're not asked. This is not asking people. If you look at any given group or gang, most of the time there will be somebody on probation or parole. They are under court supervision. Probation and parole can tell them, you will come to this meeting. It is a condition of your supervision. And 9 out of 10 people will show up, right? So that's a little different than what people expect. The larger point is we're not dealing with an opposing army. We're not dealing with a union. The images people have of these groups are just deeply unrealistic. They're not nearly as oppositional as people think. They don't like the life they're living. They may not want to be middle-class citizens, but hardly anybody likes the violence, either as a perpetrator or as a potential victim. They're not getting rich. Most quote gang members would make more money working minimum wage at McDonald's than they do being gang members. People don't believe that, but it's completely true. They get arrested, their friends get hurt, their friends get killed, they're worried for their families. Every gang member loves his mother. And approached with respect and with a recognition that they may be doing terrible things, and that's not okay. But it's not okay for them to be afraid. It's not okay for them to get killed. It's not okay for them to get hurt. And that people like us have let them down. We have not made them safe, and that's on us. And you approach people that way, they will meet you more than halfway.
It's funny, and this is related to your work, but this has nothing to do with violence. We had a block here in Yakima, and it was a gang group that was tagging the whole alley with their symbols, and we were in the middle of reading your book, and so I said, well, why don't we just go out there and talk to them? They said, no, Chief, we don't want you doing that. So another 2 people went out and just said, hey, if you keep doing this, this is what we're going to do. We're going to work with the landlord and get you kicked out. If you don't, we'll work with you to deal with these issues. Professor, that was 118 days ago, and they're not tagging. I was in there this morning. I mean, it is amazing, because I don't think people think if you just say, would you quit doing that? You're driving everybody crazy. And that was part of it too, is they involved all the neighbors and said, are you sick of this? And the kids are hearing this. And, they were afraid of the kids, but they said, yeah, we wish it wasn't like this anymore. And it's amazing. I mean, I never would have thought, because it was every day within 24 hours for a year. And then suddenly we asked and they stopped.
Yeah, it is amazing. I've been doing this so long, I don't even remember what I ever learned. But you're reminding me that on that first trip to LA, working with LAPD, they were doing some very early community policing work. And one of the stories one of their frontline officers told was about a community meeting that he had put together because there had been a rash of burglaries in the neighborhood. And you know this, and anybody who's ever been burgled knows this. The the trauma that comes with being broken into is way disproportionate to any objective economic loss. People feel violated, they don't feel safe, they feel alienated. So this string of burglaries was really distressing for the neighborhood. So this officer put together a community meeting, and he and some of the neighborhood were in somebody's living room, and there was a knock on the door. And this kid walked in and he said, "I heard you're talking about all these burglaries. You're talking about me."
Wow. Well, it's something to it. It's way outside what all of us
Amazing.
believe, but it's true. So real
Yep.
quick, I'm going to see. Do we have any questions?
We do have a couple questions.
You can hear Lieutenant Janice, I hope. He'll be loud.
I can.
Okay, so the first question is from Miguel. In the book, it said people believe the hard part is to control or handle the bad people. The hardest part was controlling or handling the good people. How does YPD plan to have better planning, communication, following up with other agencies, programs in the community?
So will you talk about why that's important, and then I'll kind of answer that question as well.
I will. So the three groups that this is about on the intervention side are these key figures in the community that have standing in the eyes of the streets, people who can provide social services and that sort of thing. And then the elected and appointed officials that do criminal justice and city government and county government and federal government, that sort of thing. And then they engage primarily with the streets and other folks in the community. But the working partnership is community services and government institutions. The first two will always show up. It turns out there are always people in the community who get this and are desperate, and they have some things to teach the rest of us, and they may take some persuading, but it turns out they will always show up and they will always be good partners. You can always find or support the right kind of social service providers. The problem here is when elected and appointed officials can't get along, won't work with each other, won't change what they're doing, and otherwise keep this from happening, keep it from working, keep it from being sustained. And the questioner got it about right. After I'd been doing this for a while and having crashed and burned in the worst possible way in Baltimore, I did find myself saying to myself, I know how to control the bad guys, I just don't know how to control the good guys.
Yeah, so I wasn't going to say Baltimore because I didn't know if that would trigger you. But for those who didn't read the book, really, I mean, it impacted your health and your sanity, and it was just so difficult to.
Yeah.
They would tell you to your face they're going to do it, and then all this stuff would collapse, and that's probably what the question is. And I think my answer to that would be that before we went live, you and I were talking about how do you keep this going? How do you make sure this doesn't just die on the vine? And your answer was you have to have this become institutionalized. So my answer to this to Miguel, is it Miguel?
Yes,
would be
Miguel.
that I think the city leaders need to come out and collectively commit to doing this, explain what it is they're doing, and then we have to work as a group to collaborate and institutionalize this so that we don't find ourselves in 5 years saying, oh, remember we did that, it worked, and now it's all gone. So I will say I am committed, and I believe that our partners are, but I think that's part of what we really need to do, and I think people need to hear that. I mean, we were talking earlier about people who've lost faith in the system, probably for good reason, because the system has left them out to get hurt. And so I think that's part of it too, is we have to rebuild that relationship so that we can trust each other. And I guess the last thing I would say, and I know this was paramount to a lot of what you did, is listen. We have to listen to what it is people are saying, because instead of telling them what needs to happen in their neighborhood, we need to be listening to what it is they want, and maybe the way they frame the issue would get us to look at this different. I don't know if you have any more comments about that.
No, I agree with all of that, and in a very real way, this is a political question. So I don't think I mean by that partisan politics. This really isn't so much partisan, but elected and appointed folks will be more likely to do things that they know that their constituents care about. And one of the, you were asking before we went live, has anything changed in the last 10 years since I wrote the book? One of the things that's changed is that this has become a lot less of an inside game. Violence prevention for the longest time was something that very small numbers of elected and appointed officials could basically joust over and make their own decisions about. To your point about listening and not just telling, those were decisions that were mostly imposed on their constituents. That's really changing. And to Miguel and the public who might be listening to this, you have a very important role, if you believe this, in saying to elected and appointed officials, the city, the community insists that this be done. We have done our due diligence. There are facts here. There are things that work. There are things that don't work. We're not going to allow you to do what you have always done, at least in many places, and do whatever you feel like, regardless of the evidence and the impact. We're going to insist that this be done right. And the stronger that voice is, the more likely we are to get this right.
I'm glad you say that, because in the book club, a lot of people have said to me, well, what can we do? And I think there's a wide variety of things you do. You can help the nonprofits. You can actually get involved firsthand, but you can also hold us accountable. Yep. And if they feel like it's that important, I think we're saying the same thing. That's part of their job. You know, it's a lot easier for them to hold elected officials accountable than me. I'm an appointed official. So another question?
The follow-up question from Miguel is, how does YPD plan to advise violent youth and people that YPD and the community is not going to put up with the violence? Can you spread the word in schools or on the local news in Spanish and English? So
my answer to that, and of course I would hope you would comment, Professor, is that one of the things that Professor Kennedy outlines in the book and has talked about today is that this is actually a very small group of people. This is not 300 kids in our community, right? This is probably more like 30 or less. And we have objective mechanisms to identify who they are, which we've done. And it's not about race, and it's not about income, and it's not about zip code. This is about what they do or what they've been involved with, that's easily, objectively identifiable. And so what we're doing, which is really spelled out in the book, is locating those specific people who are driving the violence, not the drugs, not the burglaries, not the stolen cars, although all of those are important. But if we're going to stop, don't shoot is the name of the book. This is about violence. If we're going to stop the violence, we have to start with that group. And there's a specific method that the book outlines for doing that. I don't know if you have any comments about that.
That's exactly right. You know, the awful term that had currency for such a long time was, when we're talking about violence in Black communities, was Black on Black violence. And for all kinds of good reasons, that phrase has become unacceptable. And I'm delighted that that's the case. The phrase that has come to replace it in most places is, quote, community violence, unquote. And I'm pretty unhappy with that as well. Because, Chief, to your point, and we have real science on this now, there is no such thing as a dangerous community. Mm. There are communities with very small numbers of extremely high-risk people in them. But abstract, mathematically remove their violence and their victimization from the affected community, that's not a high-violence community anymore. It's not the community, it's them. And they are, again, as or more likely to be victimized as they are to offend. So we really have to center their fear and trauma and risk. But it's just not very many people. And so we really don't have to broadcast this to the community. We don't have to say to the community, don't be violent. They're not going to be violent. We don't have to say this to the schools. Almost nobody in the schools is going to be violent. It's a very small number of people. And the broadcast mechanisms don't work with them. So we have to talk directly to them.
And you even say in the book that if you had, and I'm just throwing out a number, a gang with 20 people, you might have 2 shooters. Like even
That's right.
within the gang, it's rare that somebody would be well, I think you call it a trigger puller. What is it the phrase you use?
I was taught years ago by my colleagues in Boston, impact players.
Okay.
And as you know, and I can't see the lieutenant, but the lieutenant's going to know this as well. Some of those impact players are not trigger pullers. Part of the problem is they're too careful for that. They get other people to pull their triggers for them. But you're exactly right. I was actually having this conversation with a city that we're just setting up with, and was saying to them, there's hardly anybody out there who's really dangerous. And I was talking about what we call the group member involved folk. And one of the folks that I was supposedly instructing said, and most of them aren't real trouble. It's only a few of them. And that's exactly right. That's how it works.
Okay, so do we have any more questions right now, or?
We have some questions about speeders and what we're doing about speeders and that impact, and also some questions about hiring and recruiting.
Okay, so we have questions not related to this, so I'm gonna deal with those.
I'm going to jump in actually, because I love the speeding question.
Okay.
This became a metaphor for my own education. So we keep saying very, very small numbers of extreme people. And when we were first sorting this out, I thought, okay, so that's true for homicide in Boston. Some problems are like this, but then there are a lot that aren't, right? Speeding, I said to myself, is not like this. Everybody speeds on the highway. And then some years went by and I realized I'd been wrong about this. So it's true that we all speed. I have this conversation with rooms full of assistant U.S. attorneys and say to them, raise your hand if you speed with your drive. And everybody raises their hand. And I say, you are officers of the court and you're all serial recidivists, right? They don't like this. I've had this conversation in Sweden where they're unbelievably law-abiding. Everybody speeds, right? So speeding is not like this, only it turns out that it is. Because when we all speed, we speed with care and civility. We're breaking the law, that's right, but we're not really putting ourselves at risk. We don't want to get hurt. We don't want to hurt the people in our car. We don't want to hurt the other people on the highway. We slow down when it rains. We don't tailgate. And we all know that while we go about our business of civil law breaking, there are a few people out there who are not like that. And they're 40 miles an hour over and they tailgate and they weave through traffic and they don't slow down when it rains. And the rest of us criminals don't like them.
Well,
right?
It's funny you say that because I think that actually comes out in your book when you talk about the drug markets. And then Lieutenant Janice, I haven't read it, but he found the book you wrote on domestic violence, which is really applying the same principles, right?
Yeah.
And here I gave you an example today with graffiti. I think the principles are kind of universal. I mean, as a parent, you were talking about how families parent, right? I mean, it's, if you do this, this is what I'm going to do to you. But if you choose good, we're going to do this. I mean, I do believe they tend to be universal principles. So I know that's not why we're here to talk about it, but I do think there's something to it. Will you real quick touch on the domestic violence?
Yeah, so domestic violence is horrible. There's something especially toxic about fear and violence in intimate relationships where people are drawn by their own emotions and commitment and sometimes by their own situations to be in dangerous, fearful, and worse relationships where there's special risk and stigma and danger associated with trying to do something about that harm. As bad as quote gang violence is, the most toxic intimate partner violence is often even worse. And it then turns out that these same basic principles of extreme concentration amongst very small numbers of the most dangerous people also tend to apply. So people who really know about domestic violence will talk about a whole range of awful stuff, not just serious physical violence, but controlling behavior and economic abuse and management, control of relationships and abuse visited on other family members and children and pets. It's all awful. But it turns out, again, as an empirical matter, that the abusers who are most likely to do the most serious harm to the most vulnerable victims are a very small subset of repeat and chronic offenders. And it turns out they can often be identified and they can be addressed and controlled in some of these same fundamental ways. So there aren't that many of them. We're working in Vermont right now, which has twice the domestic violence rate of the national baseline. They think of themselves correctly as having a very serious domestic violence problem. The domestic homicide rate in Vermont at twice the national average is about 1.5 per 100,000 in the population. And most domestic homicide is committed by single abusers, of course, mostly by men, which means that every year, the most dangerous men in Vermont represent 1.5 people out of, let's call it 50,000 men in Vermont. Right. It's a very small number of the most extreme people. And then you look at them and they have typically the same sort of background that other kinds of violent offenders do. They're not specialists. They do other wrong things. They assault not only their alleged loved ones, but strangers. They drink, they drug, they commit other crimes. They have unregistered cars. They're on probation, they're on parole, they have outstanding warrants. And in the first domestic violence call-in we ever did, when we built a system on this, the U.S. attorneys typically, they will say they have no federal predicate when it comes to domestic violence. Domestic violence is not a federal crime. And the AUSA, the assistant U.S. attorney in this district, looked at a dozen of the most abusive men in his town and said, I don't care. We know who you are. We know what you're doing. I will send undercovers to you and I will buy drugs from you. And then I will arrest you federally. We have a phone that rings at DEA, and I will send you to South Dakota. Stop it. And guess what? They did.
It worked.
So some of these same fundamentals turn out to apply even in places that feel very different.
All right. So how about this one? What are the most common mistakes that communities make when trying to reduce violent crime?
Almost always what communities do is try to do something else. And this is such a deeply ingrained way that we all think about this that we don't even notice it. So everything that we've been talking about is about really immediate engagement with the violence and those closest to the violence. That's not the way we think about this. We think about systems. So you will have been in meetings with your peers where people talk about violence for 2 hours. And then when you think back, you realize they haven't said a word about violence. They've talked about funding and staffing and the judges and probation and the law and the prosecutors and parents and the schools, but nobody's actually said anything about violence. or we talk about the economy and racism and all kinds of things that are profoundly important, but they're hard to change, and we don't have the capacity to change them quickly. What communities don't do is the same thing that the official institutions mostly don't do. They don't say, and I don't know what the number is, but you've already kind of spoken to it. In Yakima, there are probably less than 100 people whose names we know who are at the heart of this. And if we affect them, we have affected our problem. That's not how we go about this. And not just communities, but everybody else makes the same fundamental mistake.
So would you include things like building basketball courts and after-school programs, although very important, that doesn't address the immediacy of violent crime?
None of those are going to have any impact on the violence.
But they're,
or
again, they're
so
not bad things. It's
they're
just
they're
not
good things. They just won't help with this.
okay. So with your experience in research, and you kind of touched on this with Ghetto Side, what, for people who don't really understand, what drives kids to join groups and gangs?
Mostly nothing drives them. Mostly, and the formal term in gang sociology on this, which goes back to the 60s, is drift. People don't choose this. They just kind of slide into it without paying too much attention. Or they're driven into it because other people are putting them at risk, and they feel like they need protection, and this is the kind of protection they feel that they can make. But there are two things that mostly don't happen. Individuals don't look around and say, I've got a kind of equal choice. I can become a gang member or a CPA. I think I'll become a gang member. That's not what happens. And the other thing that doesn't happen is the existing groups don't recruit, right? We get this all the time. The gangs are recruiting in the middle schools. No, they're not. Do middle school students have older brothers and sisters who are involved? And does that create a kind of opportunity where they can make their way over there? Sure, that's what happens. But there is no HR department in the street gang looking for interns, right? It's just not how it works.
Okay, so I have one more question. Well, it's really two questions, but what are some of the things you now know that you wish you knew 25 years ago?
Can I come back for another couple of hours?
Sure.
I say to my own staff and colleagues, I spend a lot of time feeling really stupid, and that is completely true. I don't spend a day or a week or a month doing this without seeing something that we should have seen a long time ago. So, as my military friends say, that is a target-rich environment, that question. I think the fundamentals remain the fundamentals, that communities are fundamentally safe, they're fundamentally healthy. This is not a community problem. The history and the present harm and estrangement between the authorities and affected communities is a root cause of what's going on. We blame this on the affected communities. The roots of this are not in the affected communities. The roots of this are on us. And the more we understand that, the better off we're going to be. Most of what we do about violence just doesn't work, whether we're committed to communities or whether we're committed to law enforcement. The ways we have done this just don't work, either separately or together. And it takes these special efforts with this really extraordinary focus on the immediate dynamics and those involved to get anywhere. Those things remain the fundamentals. And then the more time you spend with those fundamentals, the more you realize how wrong we've gotten them and how much work they need.
So I'm going to actually kind of make a statement, but ask for you to weigh in on this, especially if you think I'm wrong. But we have a relatively politically conservative community. And I think some folks may watch you and listen to you. And you, as you say in your book, oh, who's the guy with the long hair? You know, the hippie who's trying to do all this. I think when you read the book, I don't get a sense that this is really left or right. I don't, I mean, I know everything in this country seems to be very polarized politically. I've had some criticism of me for even choosing the book, saying, oh, you just want to coddle gang members and, you know, you want to hug a thug, or you've heard all this. I personally think that it really comes down to, do we care about them as human beings? Do we look at them as members of our community, and do we want the violence to stop? I mean, to me, that's sort of the essence of all this, right? They're not just unknown people, but they're members of our community who, for a wide variety of reasons that we've both been talking about, have now chosen to engage in this very high risk behavior where they're also at high risk. And maybe, like you say, it's a response, right? Maybe they haven't chosen, they're responding to self-protection. But to answer those folks, what would you say? How would you talk about what I just said?
I don't think that either the way let's call it the left has usually looked at this, or the way let's call the right has usually looked at this work. I'll offend everybody by the time I'm done. You know, I often think that my quote progressive unquote friends are more disrespectful of the community than the conservatives are. That we absolutely know that we have done terrible, terrible, terrible things to these communities. And we know that even though that's true, they deal with each other and they raise their kids so that, and that we, like, this is science now, almost none of those young people will grow up to be part of this high risk world. And even if they are part of it, most of them are not predatory. They're scared and victimized and traumatized. So when my progressive friends say we have to intervene with all the boys before they're 8, or it's too late, they're lost, empirically, that's not right. If we don't intervene with any of those 8-year-olds whatsoever, 99.9% of them are going to be just fine. And the apparently caring attitude on the outside is in fact beginning from a position of writing off the community in a way that is completely unjustified and deeply, deeply, deeply insulting. And when I hear my friends on the right say, yeah, there's violence in the community and this represents a complete breakdown in the social fabric, they are empirically absolutely wrong too, right? The violence is there, that's right. Almost everybody in the community doesn't like it, including most of the gang and group members who don't like being victimized and who love their mothers. And if all we do is work on the long-term issues in the community, which is what the left wants to do, then we surrender the community to violence for the next 20 or 30 or 40 years while we do that work. And if we just lead with law enforcement, which is often what the right wants to do, well, we've done that for decades. We've got more people in prison than anybody in the world ever has. We have 5% of the world's population, 25% of the prisoners. And we're dealing with an epic violence spike right this minute. So if this other stuff worked, I wouldn't be arguing with it, but it doesn't.
So let me end with this. I would say professor, but you asked me to call you David, and I will. I just thank you so much. I mean, you reached out to us. You wrote a great book. You've done amazing work over decades, and you still do it. And communities like ours, I don't know that we would stumble into this otherwise. And so I just personally want to tell you how much I appreciated reading this, how informative it was, and how grateful I am that you'd be willing to spend the time with us. I just can't thank you enough, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And I so appreciate, and I know our community appreciates, that you would take time and spend it with us. And so if you have anything, parting words you want to say, I want to give you the floor, and then we will wrap this up.
Only something you know and something that I know. So the thing that you know is this really matters, right? Violence is different and it's special and it hurts people and it hurts communities in a very, very special and significant way. And so the fact that Yakima is making this commitment is really important. And what I know is that you can do it. And we have, you've thanked me for showing up. My world will always show up. We have, and this isn't just true of my office, but people who are devoted to violence prevention will always show up. You've got people in your community who've been doing this and are going to continue to show up. We have a saying at the National Network, which is we like to work with people who like to work. So glad to be invited.
Right. So with that, we will wrap it up. And to our local audience, we will see you next week. I don't have the topic right on top of my head.
Prosecutors.
It's the prosecutors. So we will have the prosecutors next week. Perry Mason will be here. So Professor, have a great week. And thanks again. With that, we will wrap it up.
Thanks, Chief. Thanks, everybody.